So, hello and welcome to session 41 of our Tarot On videos during the pandemic of 2020. We are now on, I think, about the 4th or 5th week of our lockdown here in the UK. The figures are currently that there are something like 200,000 global deaths and about 20,000 in the UK we reached today, which is ghastly news. However, it could have been worse had we not socially locked down, literally globally. At the time of this live recording, half the planet is under some form of lockdown, and we seem to be flattening the curve of the pandemic, so that at least is some good news in amidst the economic toll that this is taking on all of us. So we have formed the Order of the Hermits in order to keep ourselves somewhat safe, sane, and spiritualized during this time, because I think it is important that we focus on it's important to us, what our values are. And for me, it's been to discuss and teach things that I think are important to me. And I hope that we can share those things together. Greetings from Transylvania. I've been to Transylvania. It was a remarkable one-week experience, and not what I expected at all. The remnants of the Russian influence, the Eastern Bloc influence, were still there, and a very interesting place, full of rich history and very friendly people. I have a remarkable photo of two elderly women who were sat just minding their own business, and I thought I'd take a photo of them, and they were laughing uproariously about something they'd said about me. I've no idea what it was, but they thought it was absolutely hysterically funny, and I have a photo of them laughing away. I do have fond memories of Transylvania. Not a vampire in sight, I have to say. So today we are going to cover the second part of our 10-part series. And for those who have been watching previous series, you'll know by now that it won't be an accident that there are 10 parts to sessions 40 to 50, that they will follow some sort of sequence. And so we are covering Initiatory Tarot in these 10 sessions. If you're here for some practical tarot teaching, tarot reading techniques, then I suggest going back through some of the other videos, because for these 10 videos, we're going to be talking more esoteric, more mystical, spiritual, conceptual, and abstract tarot, rather than practical down and dirty techniques, which we've covered already in previous sessions, and we may get time to cover a lot more of that if these lockdowns continue, or if we find ourselves in some sort of weird Gnostic loop of continuing on. I hope I shall arrive there soon, by the time we get through this. So I'm going to show you today some alchemy, and this is one of my favorite books on alchemy, called The Golden Game, because it's a beautiful resource of alchemical diagrams with just enough explanation to start to make sense, but not enough to waste space and allow you to come to your own feelings and thoughts about the alchemical diagrams that are in it. What has alchemy got to do with tarot? Well, it all goes back to our Tree of Life and our Initiatory Tarot that I introduced yesterday. So if you're watching this as a recording and haven't watched yesterday's, then please catch up on session 40 before you dive into this. Although I hope I can explain it, even without yesterday's session. And then I'm going to read today's gems in the lockdown. And I'm going to read today from the Golden Dawn. I've highlighted 2 sections. It's very difficult not to read the whole thing because the Golden Dawn rituals are very beautiful, very powerful, very evocative. And a lot of the text that goes with them is also very evocative. But there's a couple of things that relate to what we're going to talk about today that I thought I'd read out today. So I've highlighted those 2 in there. And that will be our sort of bedtime reading for tonight. So let's start with alchemy then. There's a lot to say about alchemy. I have written my own book on alchemy called The Alchemical Amphitheatre, which has some exercises that you can follow through, and they're very kitchen-based. You can do them with a bit of salt and a bit of water, and it's nothing very clever with regard to alchemy, but it does get you into the symbolism of the alchemical process. Now, to me, alchemy is both a practical and a spiritual art. It has symbolism that relates to both everyday observations about nature, but also our own spiritual transformation as well. And one of the classics of alchemy, which I wanted to refer as to with regard to what we're talking about, is the Mutus Liber, which is the Mute book, which was published in 1677. And it's called the Mute book because obviously it doesn't have any text or description with it. Waite wrote a lot about alchemy as well, and he was very verbose about alchemy, and reading Waite on alchemy is like, as they say, obscura per obscurum. It's making the obscure even more obscure. If you've got Waite's verbose text on alchemy, writing about obscure text on alchemy. So it's best to go from the pictures. And I want to show you this picture, which is the frontispiece of the Mutus Liber. And we can see it's Jacob's ladder, exactly as Eleonora is rightly pointing out. It is our ladder that we've talked about before. And this is the typical ascent narrative that is common in esoteric literature, that we go from below our sleeping state. You'll notice Jacob is asleep, and the angels are calling him as they go up and down the ladder. He has a dream of the ladder called Jacob's Ladder. Incidentally, the film called Jacob's Ladder is also an incredible explanation of initiatory processes, and it follows the model of Dante's Inferno. It's a horror film, and it does have a few gruesome scenes in it and a few shock scenes in it, but if you can stomach it, then Jacob's Ladder, the film, is very, very powerful, and one of my favorite initiatory films as well. So here we have Jacob's Ladder, and then we go through various stages of the Mute book that have lots of stages of the alchemical process. Now, the alchemical process is basically turning the prima materia, the base metal or the base substance, into gold. And eventually the gold gets made, and then it's touched on the object, and the philosophical stone can then create gold by touching any material. So already we've got an interesting idea that the philosopher's stone can actually turn other things into gold. Perhaps it's more about a state of awareness than it is about any physical process. But by the time we get to the end, I just wanted to point out this final scene where the ladder is actually laid down. So the goal is attained and the whole world, and you'll see this sort of world-like synthesis. It is brilliant, Diane. Yep, it is absolutely like a tarot story because it is telling an ascent narrative. And at the very end, the ladder gets laid down because all of the opposites have been equilibrated, the moon and the sun, and the sleeping body has now ascended, like we saw in the Waitrinic tarot with the high priestess at 2 different levels. And everything has now been united and crowned in one final scene. But the ladder that has been used to get there has been laid down. And that's, I think, a really important concept, that all of the material that we're using is only a tool to get us there. It isn't the goal. The goal isn't to know all of this stuff. The goal is to actually use it to attain the state that is desired. So how does that relate to tarot and to the Tree of Life and to the Initiatory system? I hear you ask. I sound like an Instagram influencer. A lot of you guys have been asking me when no one has. Well, the answer to the unasked question is temperance. Temperance in Crowley's Thoth deck is renamed art, and it's a very alchemical drawing. So if you go and check out the Thoth deck and look at Temperance, you'll see that it's a very alchemical card. Now, the Golden Dawn actually had 2 versions of the card. One looked like this one, which Waite used, and one, guess what, looked like the one that Crowley used. So the Golden Dawn got there first, and then Waite took one version of it and Crowley took another version of it. And I sometimes suspect that what they were trying to go for in the Golden Dawn was an outer and an inner version of the cards. So it is a form of sacred marriage. It is also a form of, I'll come on to what it's a form of in a second. So Temperance, as we looked at yesterday, is this card that corresponds to this path here. And Temperance is made when we synthesize and experiment in our triangle at the bottom of the Tree of Life. So in our Initiatory system, as a Zealotor, we do all of these things. We get interested in everything. We want to study and learn everything. And we make decisions, the Last Judgment, try and enter a new world. We reflect on it, we come back to it, we have counselling or psychotherapy, and we reflect on it, or we journal and reflect on it, and we go around this triangle and we synthesize it to try and bring it into one model, one view of the world that is consistent, congruent, and comprehensive. And so those tarot cards of Kesheth, as we saw yesterday, making the rainbow in Hebrew through correspondence, make the bow that fires the arrow. And you can see that we have an arrow shape on Temperance with the line going across because it corresponds to Sagittarius. Isn't that weird that the astrological symbols, which were created a long time ago, actually match? You can see the symbol of Sagittarius there in astrology, but that is totally different to the Tree of Life and totally different to the tarot and totally different to the attribution of the tarot cards on the Tree of Life based on their Hebrew letters. And yet it sort of fits. The bow fits, the arrow fits. It's a very synthetic and comprehensive system. So what then happens is we do all of these things and we get the Blasted Tower. We finished with the Blasted Tower yesterday, which goes across these 2 paths here. So our synthesis constantly breaks down our beliefs. We go back, we test it again, we make new decisions, try different things, breaks it down. We go back through synthesis, and for those who have done any of the Golden Dawn initiations, you'll see that this is a ritual that is actually the neophyte ritual. The neophyte ritual in the Golden Dawn, when people look at like these big heavy books like the Golden Dawn, this is one version of it, and think about these weird Freemasonic type of rituals that go on for ages. Well, actually, they're very powerful because they are based. The temple is like a tree of life, and you get taken into the temple and then moved around, and other people come to you, and you get taken forwards and backwards based on the tree of life. So you're actually walking through a temple that is the tree of life. Okay, and so all rituals, well, good rituals or initiatory rituals, certainly those in the Order of Everlasting Day that I'm involved with, we teach rituals that follow the tree of life. Then what happens is we go through this process and we go round and round and round it. And if you remember from yesterday, I said you could tell what grade someone was by the questions that they ask. And the grade of the Zelator to the Theoricus, the question that is different. Now, most people ask questions like, is the supermarket open today? Or how can I get a promotion? Or does my partner love me? Or how can I bring up my kids correctly? All valid questions. But the difference is a Theoricus, the difference between a Zelator and a Theoricus is they ask this one question. Is there more than this? Is there something I'm missing? Is there something else? And that is the difference that takes you up this path, because you question the world on the middle path. And the initiatory system is a series of questions up the middle path. And the key questions are based on those tarot cards of the world, Temperance, and the High Priestess. Those are the three key questions that divide the worlds. And so if someone is busy asking what's the best book to buy, what's the best this to do, what's the whatever, it's a Malkuth type question. It's just how can I rearrange the contents of my life and universe in order to make myself a bit more comfortable. The difference is the question, is there more than this, takes you up in another level. Now, this is where the alchemy comes in. And with alchemy, what we do is we, as someone did actually say, the alchemical wedding, that was Eleonora again. And I think someone had also said about the ladder, that was Eleonora as well. And someone had said about it being the tarot journey as well, which I can't see in the comments, but thank you for that. It is a tarot journey, and what we do is in alchemy, there are usually 12 stages or 7 stages, sometimes 9, sometimes 15. A bit like the Gnostics, when you say alchemy, you're talking about a whole series of contradictory beliefs. So in most series of alchemy transformations, there are about 12, but we can map them onto the tree of life. And the one that we put for our Zelator, if you remember from yesterday, and this diagram is going to get very overlapped, so I'll put that in a big square. So over here, calcination. So one of the first stages of alchemy is called calcination, and you see this in all of those alchemical drawings that you'll see in here. Okay, the first stage is usually calcination, and this is the slow burning fire that heats up the primer material, the first material. And this is what zealotors are like. They have this burning fire. They want to know everything, and they want to know it now. And then they become experts in everything because they've read a book and they've Googled something. And the zealotor is busy calcinating. And our job in teaching and for initiation is to keep that in a crucible, to actually hold that fire so that it burns and burns and burns slowly. And eventually it starts to strip away all of those questions. And when someone asked a few days ago about the way of exhaustion, this is partly what I mean by that. That eventually those questions have to be burnt out. The person has to come to the end of those questions. And the usual way of doing that is by doing the work. So the idea about joining a witchcraft coven, that you have to work for a year and a day before you join. My favourite story about, the sort of martial artist who arrives at the temple and is locked out and given a brush, and then he sweeps the outer courtyard, and the seasons go by and the doors don't open, but he carries on, and eventually everyone else leaves, but one person always carries on sweeping. Then eventually, after about 5 years, the doors open and he's sort of like just motioned in. And that's the calcium, the slow burning fire that goes on. And it has to be done in a crucible, which is why our outer group, our self-study group, is 1 year, and it's called the Crucible Club. And that is to put people in a self-study crucible so that they can learn the basics and really to work by themselves and hold that slow burning fire. Because the alchemists had a saying, give not up calcination. Never give up calcination. No matter what grade you get to, you always have to have that slow burning fire. If you don't have the fire, you can't I was going to say pump the balloon up like a hot air balloon. But that's because I watched the Aeronauts a while ago and it's film, but about hot air ballooning. So the calcination is sort of firing you up for a higher ascent. Burn away all that is untrue with essence, awareness, renew. Nice. That's Evelyn's. So the zealotor is zealous, they burn away, and then through the world path, they get initiated, and it has to be an external initiation into the grade of Theoricus. And the alchemical process for Theoricus is a different one. And I'll put that in a square as well so that we can see it. I'll put an arrow, and I'll put an arrow to that one. So for Theoricus, it is solution. And the process of solution is pictured on Temperance. Basically, all that they are, all that they believe in, is dissolved in a constant solution. And it's quite gentle, but quite rough for the person. From the outside, it's very easy to initiate this solution. But for the person, it's like nothing else they've ever experienced. It is a constant blasted tower experience, as everything that they think they are is separated out from them. Now, separation is a slightly later stage, but at this stage, it has to be broken down in terms of their beliefs and values. And now you can see, when we go back to our NLP stuff, why, for me, beliefs and values are so important in change work, because it is we are made of our beliefs. A person is the sum total of their beliefs. And if you remove that and their sense of time and space and self-identity, they're not a person anymore. Or they're not this person, they're actually this person. So what we do with the initiatory system is build a structure, a ladder up the tree of life, so that these processes, which are very dangerous and very destabilizing, can be done within a formal structure that eventually can be set aside and completely ignored as being the illusion that it is. But nonetheless, it allows us to climb the ladder. When you get to the top of a ladder, you get off the ladder and go into the attic or go onto the roof or go to wherever you're going. The aim of a ladder is to hold on to the top of the ladder. The aim of the ladder is to get you somewhere. And that is the same with Kabbalah and tarot and occultism and rituals. Their aim is to get you somewhere, not as an aim themselves. And that's really important. So Yesod, when we're talking about the grades of Theoricus, a lot of the work that's done here is dream work, counseling, self-analysis, astral travel, the inner guide meditation, journaling, psychosynthesis is one of my more favored psychoanalytical approaches. And all of that work on the identity and the psyche and the ego process is done in this stage. You'll notice it's still quite a low stage on the Tree of Life. There's still an awful lot to do, but this can take years. And each stages can take many years. And there's no problem with that. There's no problem. Some people go from here to here really quickly. Some people then spend about 10 years trying to get across here. Some people go from there's no time scale to this because it depends on what you've already done, what your background is. But there are important things if you're going to follow this path, and that's one of the things that I wanted to read as our bedtime reading, as our gems in the equinox. Gems in the equinox, that's the original. Gems in the lockdown from the Golden Dawn is why it's important to learn correspondences and why it's important to practice ritual. Practicing ritual is a way of living the correspondences, acting them out, responding in the universe, engaging with the universe. Learning the correspondence with tarot is our way of learning the language of the universe to communicate with it. And that's really important because when the Golden Dawn were formed, they eventually fell apart after about 12 years. And most people put it down to the infighting between some of the main people. But an order is made of the people in it. And when we look at the letters that were being written by the members of the order, the students, they were saying a very common thing. And that is, I don't know why I'm doing these rituals. These rituals are just empty. I'm just performing these perfunctory actions, but I don't know why. It's just silly. It's just empty. And then other people were saying, I'm learning all of these Hebrew correspondences and tarot cards that, this is Mars and it's card 16 and it relates to pay, the Hebrew letter for the mouth, and it relates to the number 5 because Mars corresponds to Gibora and it relates to the color red and I can see the red on the cloak. And why am I learning all of this stuff? And that was because originally the Golden Dawn taught correspondence between the symbol and the rituals and their relation to our state of mind and our engagement with the world. So when they started to fight amongst themselves, they weren't able to teach the students properly anymore. So the students were either learning ritual or they were learning correspondence, but they weren't learning what was originally being taught. And that was the linking between what you're learning and real life. And that's the important thing to me, that it has to be applied to your everyday life. People talk about Yesod as the treasure house of images. And a lot of people, and if you go back now and look at all of our videos about Wake World, you'll see that people can get lost in this by going round and round their own self-reflection. They think that they're teaching, they think that they're learning, they think that they're doing all sorts of things, but basically they're just telling the world how good they are. And they're holding their own image constantly and sucking other people in to support their view of the world. They are not destroying themselves, because the people who are busy going higher up the tree, destroying themselves, are not interested in taking anyone with them at all, ever. Narcissism. Yeah, the whole image of Narcissus was very important to Dafri John. And that reflection is very Yesod related. Okay, so we have our own little traps in here. There's a trap in all of these, all the way to the very top, but that's the particular trap here. Look at me, how clever am I? All of these other things. And it's a very easy trap to get into, because it's our natural state. We want to support our own identity. Our identity is there to keep our identity. That's what we're to do. It doesn't like being destroyed. And so the initiatory system is entirely unnatural in that regard. And has to be done very carefully and in a systematic way to stop it spilling out into all sorts of what Kenneth Grant called astral tangential tantrums, where the energy just goes left, right, and centre and destroys other aspects of the person's life without them even realising what's actually happening to them. So it's a powerful system, but it has to be done to some form of structure. Okay, so I hope I've just today introduced now what happens roughly in Yesod, what that's about. It's about dissolving the ego processes, where Zealotoi is encouraging practice assassination, the learning fire, and the world is our model in between them. And most people live here, as was in Wake World. Most people get stuck here, or they get stuck here. And that's fine, because you're below the veil and you can function as a fully formed, successful human being without ever going any higher than this. You don't have to. You can be very successful by just concentrating here. The people who are interested in their ego and money become influencers. They become rich, they become successful in a material, or they become celebrities and they become highly recognized, and they become very successful in the world. And that's this part here. But to a mystic, to someone interested in the spiritual life, then there's a huge world that needs exploring. And that's where we go exploring, and that's the Fool's Journey as well. Okay, so tomorrow we'll look slightly up that tree, and we'll look at maybe some of the ways we can use tarot to open up some of those experiences. And in terms of, just before I read the bedtime story, I'd like to introduce you to the Hanged Man. These came today. They've just literally arrived from Germany. So we are now on the Hanged Man, and the next figure being cast is the Death figure. So that's quite interesting. A guy in France is sculpting the Death figure to be cast in Germany and sent to the UK and US during the middle of this pandemic. So that will be quite an interesting figure to see. So we're at 34 minutes. I'd like to read our gems from the lockdown, or gems in the lockdown. And I'm going to read one section, maybe two sections from the Golden Dawn. There's a load of beautiful material in here from the rituals and so on, but I'm going to read a bit about the importance of learning. So, yeah, I'll skip the bit about the neophyte ritual and I'll go straight to this bit. Because in the Golden Dawn, they want to teach the fact that the rituals were important because they were based on and taught the symbology of the Tree of Life, so that you could actually feel it as you went through the ritual. Let me therefore urge upon the sincere reader who is to study this magical system, I think this is Regardie from his introduction to the first edition of the Golden Dawn. I think this one is about the 6th edition, and I think they're on the 8th edition of the Golden Dawn. Let me therefore urge upon the sincere reader whose wish it is to study this magical system to pay great attention to the scheme of the grade rituals, to obtain a bird's eye view of the whole, to study its movement and teaching. This should be repeated again and again until the mind moves easily from one point of a ritual to another. The synthetic outline of these rituals presented in this introduction should be found helpful as assisting in this task. Let him also study the diagrams of the temple layout and build up in his imagination a clear and vivid picture of that temple, together with the appropriate officers and their movements. Then it will be an easy matter to devise a simple form of self-initiation. It will be simple to adapt the text to solo performance. And it sort of goes on about a solo performance. But then it says, but a careful scrutiny and examination of the entire system should long precede any effort to do any practical work, if serious harm and danger is to be avoided. The language needs first of all to be mastered, and the symbolic ideas of the whole system assimilated and incorporated into the very fibre of one's being. Intellectual acquaintance with every aspect of the subject is just as necessary as personal integrity and selfish devotion to an ideal. Sincerity is indeed the most trustworthy shield and buckler that any student may possess. But if he neglects the intellectual mastery of the subject, he will soon discover where his heel of Achilles is located. But these two, that's the intellectual mastery and the sincerity or authenticity, combined are the only gods, the fundamental requisites to an insight into the significance of magic. Not only are they the sure foundation, you know that is Yesod, of course, but they conduce to the continual recollection of the goal at the end, which understanding, Bina, arises through penetrating to the root of the matter, without which the student may stray but too readily from the narrow way stretching before him. So I just wanted to read that brief section. There's a lot more in the Golden Dawn to emphasize the fact that for the Western esoteric history system, we use the tarot as a language that is then lived and experienced, applied to the world around us, applied to our own self-experience, mapped onto the Tree of Life for one goal, and that is the ascent narrative. It's to climb up that ladder to a more congruent, consistent, comprehensive state of awareness, irrespective of what you know, what books you've read, or anything else. So we have come to 40 minutes. I've just dropped in Alchemy today, and I've dropped in something about Theoricus and the grade system, and we're going to continue on with that over our 10 lessons between lesson 40 and lesson 50, and we'll see where we go from there. So thanks a lot for your time and attention. I bid you good night, and look after yourselves, look after each other, stay safe, stay sane, stay healthy, and stay indoors, I think, at the moment. Okay, bye for now.